Hey, welcome back, Casibang's crew. This is the last video of Unit 3. Today we're going to talk about cognitive and social learning theories. So first we're going to talk about cognition and its effect on operant conditioning, actually. So here are two words, a set of confusing pairs. Okay, intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is the desire to do something and to do it well just for your own sake, okay, for your own enjoyment. So for example, I want to outline module 29 because I enjoy learning, right? So you're just doing something for its own benefit, for your own internal motivation, okay? Extrinsic motivation is the desire to do something because of some sort of promised reward or implied threat of punishment. So for example, same thing, outlining module 29, I will outline module 29 because Casibang might grade it. Okay, so an external reward or punishment. So intrinsic and extrinsic motivation have a basis in cognition. It's our own thought process, okay, why we decide to problem solve, do things, perform certain behaviors, but it can also affect how effective operant conditioning might be. If you don't really care about the punishment, so for example, let's take that example of I will outline module 29 because Casibang is going to grade it. If you don't really care about your grades, then there is no, there's no operant conditioning happening. Right? I would have to come up with a different sort of punishment or a different sort of reward to motivate you to do the work. Along with intrinsic and extrinsic motivation comes this overjustification effect, this concept of overjustification effect. So basically what this is saying, if you are already doing something that you have intrinsic motivation for, you're already doing something that you really enjoy. Let's take reading, for example. Okay, let's say that you're an elementary school student and you love to read. Okay, you've loved to read since a very early age. You really like books. You like all kinds of books. And that's what you like to do in your free time. If you start being rewarded or punished for your reading, it can take away that intrinsic motivation that you had, and it can make it sort of an extrinsic motivation. So it could be something like, here's a first or third grader that already really enjoys reading and reads on their own without any prompting anyway, and now they've entered third grade, and now they have to fill out a reading log. And if they read an entire book in a month, then they get an extra reward of lunch with the teacher. So now this very student that used to read on their own without any prompting is now reading to get the reward, and they may lose that intrinsic motivation that they have for reading. That's the overjustification effect. There are three different psychologists that we talk about when we talk about cognitive learning theory. Edward Tolman in latent learning, and I'm going to explain all of these in the next couple slides. Wolfgang Kohler in insight learning, and then Martin Seligman in learned helplessness. Okay, so first we're going to talk about Edward Tolman. So he is known for experiments with mazes and putting rats in a maze one at a time to see if reward helps them learn the maze better. So the first group gets rewarded each time at the end of the maze, and they learn the maze really, really quickly. The second group is again in the maze every day, but they're only rewarded on the 10th day. So they learned the maze almost immediately on the 10th day after receiving that reward. And then the third group was never rewarded, and they did not learn the maze well at all. So this obviously shows operant conditioning in the flesh, an actual happening. But Edward Tolman also said that it shows this concept of a cognitive map. So a mental picture of a place. So clearly in the second group, the rats kind of knew their way through the maze because they were able to do it correctly once they were rewarded. So they had been in the maze 10 times or 10 days, and they remembered the way, okay? And then when they knew they were going to get a reward, they pulled on that cognitive map. So what Tolman said is that this shows latent learning. So latent means that it's something that is, it's there, but you're not really aware of it. So latent learning is this learning that remains hidden until you need to use it. So that second group of rats, they learned the maze. They made a cognitive map in their brain. They learned the maze, but they really only needed to use it after they realized that they were going to get rewarded for it. So latent learning is that learning that remains hidden. So this could be, I use the example of when I was growing up, when I was a kid, my dad loved football. So every Sunday, all afternoon, we had football games on. So I would be, playing with my brother, or I'd be doing homework with the football game on, and I wouldn't really be paying attention to it. But that information was kind of going into my head. And then when, I was in high school or I was in college and, I had friends that were boys that would talk about football, I could kind of talk intelligently about it, even though I was like, wow, I never really realized that I retained any of that information. So just because it was going on around me, I learned it without really being aware of it. And then it came out when I needed it to come out. All right, so the second cognitive learning theory is Wolfgang Kohler. And what he did is he studied chimpanzees. So he created a problem and he wanted to see how the chimp was going to problem solve. Okay, so cognition, we're talking about problem solving here. So the problem was he placed a banana just outside his cage and just outside of his reach. Like if he stuck his hand through the cage, it was just outside of his reach. So he was wondering, Kohler was wondering, what would Sultan the chimpanzee do? So Sultan tried reaching with his arm and that didn't work. And then he grabbed a stick and almost got to the banana, almost was there. Then he tried, let's put two sticks together. So Sultan's his rapid problem solving, his different ideas at problem solving, was determined to be more than just like trial and error. Let me just try a few things and see if it works. He went from arm to stick to two sticks in rapid succession. So Kohler felt like it was insight, that sudden, remember back to cognition, that sudden solution to a problem that just comes automatically. So Kohler felt like it was insight and insight learning that helped Sultan the chimpanzee problem solve. And then Martin Seligman is the third cognitive learning theory that we're going to talk about. He is really well known for positive psychology, which hopefully toward the end of the year we'll get a chance to kind of talk about a little bit. His original research was done while he was testing out the theory of classical conditioning. And he was studying whether or not dogs would escape or avoid a situation that could be potentially painful for them. So what happened is, you kind of notice in this picture here. So they had dogs in a pen, but it was a pen that they could easily escape, like they could jump out of. And in the first part of it, they would harness the dog so they couldn't escape. And then they were presented with a tone and a painful shock, right? Painful, but it didn't do them any permanent harm. And then Seligman said that he thought that the dogs would try to escape when they were presented with the tone, expecting the shock to come. So remember, classical conditioning. Okay, so that tone is associated with the shock. So then he unharnessed them in their little cage, And he placed a box in there so that they could easily jump out. And then they gave the tone, and all the dogs didn't try to escape. They just kind of cowered in their cage, and they didn't escape, even though they absolutely could have. So not only were they classically conditioned, but Seligman felt like they learned a helplessness, an inability to escape from a bad situation because they weren't able to escape previously. So he came up with this concept of learned helplessness. So it's your failure to escape from a situation because of a history of repeated failures. Seligman used this idea to explain depression and the lack of effort that depressed people might make to make changes in their lives, which again we'll talk about when we talk about depression in clinical psychology. Seligman identified 3 important elements of that learned helplessness theory. So first one is stability. So the person has to believe that their helplessness results from something permanent, okay? And in humans, it's like a permanent personality characteristic. The second element is global. Okay, so this helplessness applies to all aspects of their life, okay, everything that they try to do. And the third one is internality. So the problem comes from something within themselves, not something in their environment. So it gives them that feeling of helplessness within themselves, and they don't try to better their situation. All right, so now social learning theory. There's a really big, very important experiment that Albert Bandura did, and it is called his Bobo doll experiment. And in this experiment, and I'm going to show you a clip of this so you can see it in action, but in this experiment, he had this little blow up like clown doll. It's like a toy that you punch and it comes back at you. So he had in like a playroom, he had this Bobo doll, and he had adults go into the playroom and really just kind of beat up on this Bobo doll. And kids were in like watching through a 2-way mirror, and they were watching these adults like beat up on this Bobo doll. And Bandura wondered if when the kids saw the adults being aggressive with this Bobo doll, if the kids would then in turn go in and be aggressive with the Bobo doll. Well, what Bandura found is that yes, absolutely. The kids who saw the adults being very aggressive and beating up on this Bobo doll, the kids went in and showed that exact same behavior. So Albert Bandura called this observational learning or modeling, okay? Adults were modeling the aggressive behavior, and the children learned from that modeling or from watching, observing that behavior. And again, like I said, I will show you a clip of it because you can actually see it in action. So here's a couple of the important things about the Bobo doll experiment. Hypothesis: children who view adults performing aggressive acts will perform aggressive acts themselves. The independent variable was watching aggressive behavior. Dependent variable was the children's behavior. Control group: children that viewed the adult interact with the Bobo doll in a non-aggressive manner. And then the experimental group were the children that viewed the adult interact with the Bobo doll in an aggressive manner. And here's some pictures. And again, I'm going to show you this in a video, but here's some pictures of, first of all, there's a woman that's like punching it and she's throwing it around, and here she's on top of it, like really punching it. And then you see the kids go in there and like kick and punch and throw, like almost exactly like the woman. Okay. And here again, we see a little girl doing it. Here she's got like a hammer that she's kind of beating up on the doll. And again, here she's throwing it around, and here she's on top of it just like the woman was. Bandura said that there are 4 elements of observational learning. So first of all is attention. You have to be paying attention in order to learn. Okay, if you're not paying attention to, like in this experiment, for example, if you're not paying attention to the adults beating up on the Bobo doll, then you're not going to learn anything from it. So you have to be paying attention. You have to have memory of actually having seen it. You have to imitate that behavior. and you have to be motivated to imitate that behavior. So he said there were 4 elements that had to happen in order for observational learning to occur. Okay, so modeling here, learning by imitating others, copying other people's behavior. So there's 3 types of modeling that happens. The first one, the behaviors of others increases the likelihood that we'll do the same thing. So for example, if we see a fight break out in the boys' bathroom and a couple people are already videotaping it, then we might be more apt to take out our phone and videotape it as well. Observational learning, imitation. So you watch someone perform an act and later you're able to reproduce it closely. So that was Bandura's research with the Bobo doll. But we do this quite a lot. We do this especially as children. If we see mom doing the dishes, then we know how to perform that act as an older child. If we watch how mom gets dressed, then that helps us learn how to get dressed as well as kids. And then the third one is disinhibition. So this is when someone watches another person engage in threatening or inappropriate behavior without consequences. The observer finds it easier to repeat that behavior later on. So if you see someone, let's say in Casibang-AP Psych class during the test, if you see someone cheating and they don't get caught, then you might think, well, next time I should just go ahead and cheat because they did it and they didn't get caught. Okay. When we talk about social learning theory, we also talk about pro-social behavior. So pro-social is positive behavior. So helpful, constructive behavior. Okay, pro-social behavior. We want kids to learn pro-social behavior. Saying please, saying thank you, holding a door open, being kind to others. Alrighty, that is it for cognitive and social learning theories. Again, bring your questions into class tomorrow and we will discuss this more. Thanks. Have a good night.